Hello, and thank you for joining our Introduction to Design Thinking webinar series. My name is Keith Keating, and I'm a design thinking practitioner with GP Strategies. In this 8-part webinar series, we will be sharing the theory of design thinking from a high-level overview through each of the 5 phases and finishing with suggestions for ways that you can continue learning on your journey to becoming a design thinking practitioner. In this session, I will be sharing with you the value of design thinking and real use cases for how it is being applied. Let's start first with a quick recap on the 5 phases of design thinking. We start, of course, with empathy, where we learn about our audience. We take that information based off of our empathy research, and from there we create our problem statements, where we define based on the information that we've gathered from empathy. Once we've defined our problem statements, we then move into ideate, where we brainstorm and we create solutions, to then move into prototype, where we're building out quick representations of one or more of those ideas, and of course finishing with testing those ideas and those prototypes with our users to gain and gather their feedback. So in terms of who can use design thinking, this is a bit of a trick question. The answer is anyone and everyone, any industry, any line of business. In fact, here are some examples of Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies that are using design thinking today. With Pepsi, design thinking is part of their internal culture. The same with Procter & Gamble. They're using design thinking for their product launches and product redesigns. The same with Nike. General Motors, it's part of their culture. GE, Google, Uber, if you're familiar with Uber Eats, that was a product that came out of design thinking. And Airbnb. In fact, with Airbnb, their founders attribute their initial success to design thinking. When Airbnb launched originally as a pilot in New York City, it almost failed within the first few months. And that's because the founders were focused solely on the coding of the website. They weren't focused on what customers actually wanted. And so they started conducting empathy research. And what they uncovered was the most important thing to customers were the photos, so that they could clearly see what type of apartment, what type of space they would be renting. And so with that, the founders gathered 2 cameras, and they actually went around and started taking the photos themselves to make sure that they had high quality. And from there, they started to gain new customers, and they never lost sight of this concept of being connected with the customers. And so if you've used Airbnb in the past couple of years, they've created this new feature called experiences, so that when you travel, you can have custom experiences at that destination. And that too came out of the concept of design thinking and empathy research. When they found out from customers there were other areas, other things that customers wanted from this provider. Airbnb also recognizes the importance of the concept of experience. And they've recently changed their chief HR officer to chief employee experience officer, recognizing that that concept of experience is essential in the workplace. Another example of design thinking in practice is with LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has organized a 6-week program with over 1,000 participants within Silicon Valley from Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. And the reason that they're doing this is there's a challenge right now with low employee engagement scores in Silicon Valley, which is human-centered. It's a bit ambiguous, it's complex, and not everybody is aligned on why there's low engagement scores. So that's a perfect recipe for using design thinking to help uncover what the challenge is, but also uncover solutions. Another example is a telecom company in Australia by the name of Telstra. Telstra has started using design thinking to help reimagine their employee onboarding experience. They were receiving really low feedback scores from new hires that were going through their onboarding, and the onboarding experience also took 3 to 4 months to getting those employees to proficiency, to where they're actually being productive in the company, which is significantly too long. So using design thinking, they reimagined their onboarding experience, and they were able to reduce that time period to under 8 weeks for getting those employees to being proficient, and also improved that employee engagement score on their onboarding experience. For those of you who are Bank of America customers, or even if you're not, you might be familiar with the Keep the Change savings program. And this started over 10 years ago, where Bank of America was using design thinking to help uncover, what do our customers need? How could we be even better for our customers, solving other challenges for them? And so through empathy research, what they uncovered was that customers want more ways to save money. And so through the ideation process, Bank of America came up with the solution for the Keep the Change program, which is where they round up on every purchase from your debit card and automatically put it into a savings account. And as a result, over 12 million customers have enrolled in this program, and over $2 billion has been saved, which is a win-win for both Bank of America as a company, but also for all of their customers. Another example of design thinking in practice is with a global automotive company who was looking at their L&D industry and taking a step back to ask themselves, how might we improve the learner experience? How might we be even better business partners from an L&D perspective? And so the challenge was, this automotive company had approximately 80% web-based training and 15% instructor-led training. And the question too was, is this optimal? How did this ratio become? Who set the standard that 80% web-based training and 15% ILT was the optimal ratio to drive performance improvement and learning experience? And the question was, or the answer was rather, this is the way it's always been. And so when there is the response, this is the way it's always been, that's always a good time to maybe take a step back and reevaluate your strategy or your approach. And in this case, we took this challenge, and what we uncovered was it was not actually an optimal approach, that the learners wanted more instructor-led, less web-based training, but there was also a significant gap in the learning being provided, and that was the learners needed more soft skills training rather than just product training. And there was also a need to move towards mobile learning so that they could have a just-in-time learning solution through their mobile device. And as the result of this initiative, this automotive company, their learning division, was able to refocus their learning strategy back on the learners, increase soft skills training, increase mobile learning, and as a result, employee retention has increased, as well as they've been able to tie increased sales back to the soft skills and the mobile learning. So again, it was a win-win for this automotive company. Another example of design thinking in practice is with General Electric. A gentleman by the name of Doug Dietz is a designer at GE, and he was tasked with redesigning this MR scanner. Some of you may be familiar with this scanner. When you look at it, it's a bit archaic and a little bit scary. You can't see through it. It looks like it's going to swallow you up. It doesn't look very inviting or friendly. So Doug spent 2 years reimagining this machine. And at the end of the 2 years, he came up with this machine. And I think everybody would agree that this is more sleek, it's more modern, it's more inviting. You can see through the other side, so you know that it's not going to swallow you up. And it just looks more, again, inviting from a patient's perspective. So Doug was very excited about this design, and he started to travel around where the machines were being installed. And on one of his first visits, he's walking down a corridor behind two parents and their 6-year-old little boy. And the little boy is a little bit upset as he's getting closer to the room where the machine is, and the parents are trying to console him, to let him know that he needs to go into the machine so the doctors can find out what's wrong with him to try and help them. And as the little boy gets closer to the room, he becomes more hysterical and hysterical. And as he gets in the room and he sees the machine, he absolutely does not want to get in it. And he starts crying even harder and harder. And it turns out that the little boy actually had to be sedated in order to use the machine. And it turns out that actually 80% of most children have to be sedated in order to use MR scanners. And when Doug experienced this, he witnessed this, he took a step back and he recognized that he failed. He failed when he was designing the solution this new model because he was designing it from his perspective, from an adult, male designer perspective. He wasn't designing this for children who are patients. He wasn't thinking about it from a patient's perspective. And so he took this as a call to action. He went back to the drawing board and he started a design thinking initiative. And this time he included patients, both adults and children, nurses, doctors, other designers, and they spent about 6 months going through empathy research and ideation and prototyping and testing. And what they uncovered is the concept of experiences, which ties back to the Airbnb model. And that is that patients want an experience, even in the hospital, because when you're using this machine, it's not a happy experience. Rarely, if all, do people wake up in the morning and say, I'm excited to go in today and to use that MR scanner. They're there because it's a stressful environment. And so people want to be transported someplace else so they don't have to be focusing on the issue at hand. And so they came up with this concept of MR experience, like a rocket ship that takes you into outer space, or a pirate ship that sails around an island. And they were so keen on individual details that they actually included pina colada air fresheners to give it that island smell. And it turns out that they solved for latent needs because parents started responding that they were feeling more comfortable in this environment and even asking, hey, do you have pina coladas here? Because it was reminding them of their last vacation. And it also turns out that the child sedation rate dropped below 8% with these new MR experiences. And so as a result, Doug and his team were successful. But in the end, they added on 6 months of additional work, additional money, resources, time. Had they just started at the beginning with conducting that empathy research to uncover what it is that patients actually want, they could have ended up saving the time and the money and the resources in the long run. So at the end of the day, design thinking reminds us that you start with the patients, your learners, your customers, your end users. You start first with them to understand their needs so you're solving with them in mind, not with you in mind. The value of design thinking, first and foremost, it puts people first. Customers, end users, patients, our learners. It keeps them at the forefront of everything that we're doing. It helps us work through ambiguity when we're not sure what the problem is, or we don't have alignment. It helps to drive innovation and creative problem solving. It helps to reframe business problems. And equally as important, it helps to transform us from being order takers to being trusted advisors. So rather than the business just throwing over orders, this gives us a tool, a framework, so that we can step back and help to make sure that before we execute on those orders, that we're understanding clearly the problem or the humans on the other end of that problem, so that we can be trusted advisors. Now, if design thinking is so great, why aren't more people using it? There's a number of reasons. So the first is that it's risky, it's disruptive to process, and there are many unknowns. But this is not a negative. This is a positive. Because this gives us the framework to step back to identify, are we solving the right problems for our users? Is the business model that we're using, are the strategies that we're creating, are they actually solving for our users? And so we might uncover that no, what we're currently doing is not meeting their needs and we need to pivot. That's a good thing. That's a good thing for us to uncover that. That's why design thinking is a great tool for continuous improvement. So it is risky. It could be disruptive to your process, and there are many unknowns, but that is a positive, not a negative. There's a lack of leadership buy-in. Oftentimes, people will learn about design thinking and they'll want to apply it, but without our leaders truly buying in and supporting design thinking, we are setting ourselves up for failure. It stops at theory. Oftentimes I hear, I get it, I read an article, I saw your webinar, I know that there's 5 phases. But that's not the end of the story. That's just the theory of design thinking. It's imperative that in order for you to be a design thinking practitioner, you've got to experience and go through and actually apply design thinking. So you've got theory and application. Don't just stop with theory. Sometimes people consider it a one-time event. Yeah, we did design thinking. It was okay. It's more than that. It's a culture change. It's a mind shift. We are having to reprogram ourselves to make sure that our users are at the forefront of everything that we do. And more often than not, they're not at the forefront. And so it is a bit of a mind shift to think, start first with our learners, our customers, our patients, our end users. And lastly, the name. The name is part of design thinking's lack of global alignment, in my opinion. So if you break apart the name, 2 words, design thinking. So first of all, design would insinuate that you need to be a designer. Not true. Design thinking is a methodology for non-designers. There are tools and templates and best practices that already exist that you simply follow. You do not have to be creative. You do not have to be a designer. Design thinking also works in numbers. And so it's collectively us working together on our design thinking initiative where together collectively we're going to be able to be creative and think about and ideate and brainstorm and have our prototypes. Design thinking is not necessarily meant for one individual to be solving the challenges alone. So design does not mean you need to be creative. And thinking would insinuate that it is a thought process, which, yes, there is some to it, but the 5 phases from empathy all the way through test is action-oriented. Design thinking is fully action-oriented. So the name is a bit of a challenge, but you do not need to be creative or a designer, and it's not just a thinking methodology, it is a doing methodology. It's where you're actually applying it. One last point I want to share is you're probably hearing a lot about human-centered design. And what's the difference between human-centered design and design thinking? Or is there a difference? So human-centered design, simply put, is designing with humans in mind, designing for our humans. And in the human-centered design family, there are 6 subfamilies: design thinking, learner experience, user experience, service design, creative intelligence, and systems thinking. From an L&D perspective, I like to break this down to one level further. And in L&D, we use learner-centric design. And in the family of learner-centric design, we have design thinking, learner experience, and user experience. So that's just a little bit of definition and terminology from human-centric design to learner-centric design. So the answer is design thinking is part of the human-centric design family and the learner-centric design family. So with that, that concludes today's session on the value and application of design thinking. Make sure to check out our next session on the empathy phase. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to sharing more ideas and best practices with you. Don't forget to check out the rest of our design thinking site, and of course, feel free to add me on LinkedIn to continue this conversation or use our contact form on our design thinking site. Thanks for joining.